In part 1, we learned the history of passwords used in video games, but little did we know back then that they would soon be used to cheat the game. In this episode of Punser's Gaming Docs, we learn the history of cheat codes. The first cheat codes actually hit the scene in the early 80s, and they were primarily used by the developer to test their game before putting it out to the public. Some cheat codes were created to help the developer defeat their own creation, or to test certain parts of the game and help them find bugs. Since most of these codes were used internally, they were often personal to the developer, such as the code for Manic Miner, which was the developer's Matt Smith's driver's license. However, in 1971, the very first cheat code was created, and it was an arcade game called Computer Space. As the machine was starting up, you held the two buttons, and the game would let you start with 14 points. In 1986, the most infamous cheat code of all, the Konami code, was introduced by Kawazawa Hashimoto after he figured out the home port of the game Gradius was too hard for players, so he input a code that when entered in would give players 30 lives. Hashimoto was quoted as saying, "The arcade version of Gradius was really difficult, right? I never played it that much, and there was no way I could finish the game, so I inserted the so-called Konami code. It wasn't really discovered until the NES game Contra came out in 1987. Now it has been a part of games like Half-Life and BioShock as a way to pay homage." In the 90s, game developers started to realize that cheat codes were getting big, and the gamers enjoyed really using them, so they left them in intentionally in the game themselves. Some were just silly, like the Big Head mode in NBA Jams, and others were used to get around censorship, like the infamous Blood Code in Sega's version of Mortal Kombat. As people realized the popularity of cheat codes and altering bits and pieces of game programming, companies started to come out with cheat devices to help with altering the memory and code of the game, often used to alter anything in the game. The most common and remembered of these was the infamous Game Genie by Codemaster. You first put in the game cartridge into the Game Genie itself, and then put in the Game Genie into the NES itself, and once you turned on the system, you were greeted by a screen asking you to input a code that you found for each game that was in a rather large book that came with the Game Genie itself. What the Game Genie did was actually alter the memory within the game cartridge itself and tell the NES what to use for those. For example, if you were to enter the code SXIOPO on the Game Genie code and hit the screen enter when you had the infinite lives for both players for Super Mario Bros. However, Nintendo didn't like any product that came out to modify the NES or the game itself that they put a lock chip in the console, but third-party programmers found a way around it. Ever noticed that anything Nintendo approved had their seal of approval on it? But the Game Genie never got that approval since Nintendo had major issues with the Game Genie technology temporarily altering anything within the game. So in 1991, to stop them from being sold, Nintendo sued Galoob, and the Game Genie was no more. However, other companies created their own version of the Game Genie, such as the Action Replay for the PlayStation, Game Shark, but both did the same thing the Game Genie did. However, cheat codes are not just for NES games, but PC games have their own set of cheat codes as well, such as the case in Doom when you enter the letters I, D, D, Q, D during any time in the gameplay you enter God mode. In the game Warcraft 2, if you entered glittering prizes, you would get extra cash, and if you entered Who's Your Daddy in Warcraft 3, you entered God mode. Talked about the Konami code, up, up, down, down, left, right, BA, start, which gave you extra lives, but in Metroid, if you enter the name Justin Bailey, which, when entered, allowed you to play as Samus without her power suit and just in her uniform, but still keeping the arm cannon. However, the one cheat code that sometimes is talked about for Metroid, which really never existed, was the rumor of a code that when entered allowed you to play as naked Samus. It's sadly just a rumor. However, one code entered in Metroid, depending on the version you entered in, is so infamous that it has a varying effect depending on the version you enter it into. And that is, engage a Ridley, motherfucker. If you enter this in the original cartridge, it would cause the game to completely crash and force you to restart your console. If you entered in the Game Boy version, however, it would crash the game and send you back to the title screen. If you entered in the 3DS version of the game, it would break your system altogether. You could try to hold the reset button and to fix this, however. In most cases, you would just have to buy a new 3DS altogether. If you entered in the NES Classic Edition of the game, it brings up the message C7. An error has occurred. If the problem persists, please make a note of the error code and visit support.nintendo.com. And you would have to hard reset the system, and if you still get the message, the entire system is shot. Other famous cheat codes include, if you entered Zelda in the registration screen of the first Legend of Zelda game, you would start the game at the second level. NES version of Final Fantasy, once you get the ship in game, hold down the A button and press the B button a few times. You'll get a puzzle popping up on the screen. Once solved, it rewarded you with a few items such as gil and other items. If you thought Mega Man 2 was too tough after dying multiple times, just enter this and you'll get every weapon in the game. A5, B2, B4, C1, C3, C5, D4, D5, and E2. What are your thoughts on cheating? Do you have any memorable cheat codes you used back in the day? If so, put them in the comments. Do you use any cheat devices like Game Genie or Action Replay or Game Shark? Let me know in the comments as well. This is Paul for Punser's Gaming Doc saying peace out and stay frosty.